to do.
To that, I feel responsibility for a lot of people pain. So, like in this case, probably a sin. But some people I don't know, and I want to feel the pain of it. It's also like an addiction. But it's also...
It's an addiction, yeah.
It's from my mom, and I think she uses a lot of shame till this day.
Yeah.
And like it's that a coping mechanism, or I don't know how to call that.
Yeah, well, this is what happens with a lot of us when we're growing up, isn't it? We have a parent who feels that they want to constantly pull down their child in some way or another. Oftentimes the parent does it because they feel that if the child takes a certain action that the parent doesn't feel good about, then the parent often thinks that they're responsible for the child's action. And so what they try to do then is they try to modify the child's behaviour by, usually, some parents will do it psychologically. So that's all about shame, guilt, and all those kind of guilting the child, shaming their child, things like that. Other parents do it more verbally, like where they start to get verbally abusive towards their children. And other parents will get even more violently abusive and start belting their child and everything to correct their behaviour. So the problem often is that as a child, so if you're the child of this parent, so child of the parent, and you're feeling this barrage of emotions coming right from a young age, and they're entering your soul, right? Your half of the soul. And that then causes you to believe that to make the parent feel good about themselves, you've got to take a number of actions, right? And unfortunately, the parent now has trained you to have an addiction, to be responsible for others. Does that make sense? So now I've got this addiction to be responsible for others. So, and in particular, anybody who reflects a similar attitude or feeling as my parents' pain, I will be in particular attached to having the addiction of being responsible for them.
Try to fix it, or like to be the how do you call it, the cause of the pain.
Well, yeah, the parent's really fundamentally saying to this child that it is the cause of the parent's pain, and then the child has to change its behaviour in order to change the parent's feelings, is really what the parent's saying. So the parent is basically training the child to actually have an addiction, which is, by the way, a sin, right? And the addiction is to feel responsible for people other than itself. You see, fundamentally, the only person you really can change is yourself. And in fact, it's a lack of humility to believe you can change anyone else. That makes sense to everyone? It's a lack of humility to believe you can change anyone other than yourself, right? So if I'm truly humble, I would go, look, the only person I can change is me. I can't change you. I can influence you into change, potentially, but I can't actually make you make the change. So I can make suggestions, I can talk to you about some truth, that might help, but I can't physically do it myself. I'm not capable of doing it myself. A lot of parents want to believe that their pain is caused by their child. And this causes the child to believe, to set up an addiction, to believe that it's responsible for its parent's pain. In the process of feeling responsible, it develops an addiction in its childhood that then as an adult, it feels like, I've got to keep doing this, I've got to keep doing this, I've got to keep doing this, because if I keep doing this, eventually these people will be happy with me.
And I get love?
I'll get love from them if I keep doing it, yes. But it's not love, is it? No, because if it was love, they would love you no matter what you did, right? So it's not love. It's just the parents wanting the child's behaviour to change for the parent's sake, right? Now, that's an addiction, and it's going to have its own pain. And the pain is every time you meet a new person, they've got a certain type of sadness or a certain type of fear or a certain type of rage that matches one or both of your parents, you'll feel inclined to do things for them and save them from themselves, and
Even feel feelings for them.
try to feel feelings for them. Yeah.
Cry and...
Yeah, all sorts. You'll feel inclined to do all of that, not being aware that actually it's an addiction and therefore a sin, right? And it's going to cause you trouble, this sin, because you're going to disconnect from yourself and your own changes in preference to connecting to other people and their problems, which you can't change, right? Because the only person that can change the other person is themselves.
It's in my brain. It does it. It's easier to help someone else than me because I.
Well, this is also what happens over time. Is it's easier to, instead of, for most people, what happens is this: instead of me here developing a love of self, right? So. Instead of doing that, I work to get love from someone else, right? Because that person taught me that's how you're not going to get love until you do what I want.
And in fact, if you don't take on responsibility for my feelings, then there's going to be the opposite of love. There's going to be punishment. And so it creates a double problem where you get sort of positive reinforcement, if you like, for taking on the pain of others and feeling like, I've got to help solve that problem emotionally. And then the kind of negative reinforcement, if you like, of like, if I just do my own thing and feel my own feelings, everybody's very angry because I'm not sharing in their experience.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to feel that because everyone needs me.
Yeah, well, you get to a stage even where you completely forget yourself in almost every circumstance if you're not careful. And that's going to have its own pain as well associated with it. So that tells you that it is an addiction, and also that you're avoiding love of self, which is actually a big thing that most people avoid. They would rather have someone else love them than to let everybody else off the hook for loving them. And instead, they love themselves. Do you follow what I mean by that, Isabella? Yeah.
I do.
It's sort of like if I let Mary off the hook for loving me, then she doesn't have to love me anymore, does she?
It's the fear of being alone.
It's the fear of being unloved by everybody.
Yeah.
But also, I don't want to develop a love of self because that would let everybody else off the hook for loving me.
Yeah.
If I love myself, then I don't need Mary to love me, and I don't need you to love me, and I don't need anybody to love me if I love myself. But a lot of people, when they contemplate that, they go, but then what's going to happen? Nobody's going to love me. But actually, love is a gift, and sooner or later somebody's going to come along who actually does love you. And they'll love you not because of anything you've done for them or anything else, but because they want to give you that gift. You follow?
And also God created us to be okay alone. And a lot of us don't believe that anymore.
Yeah. It is inevitable that you will meet your soulmate in your future. It's inevitable. But God, between now and then, if you live in harmony with God's principles and laws, and in particular in harmony with his standard of love, you won't be unhappy. Right? You can become happy even though you've not met your other half yet. Right? So the only reason why we don't become happy is because we generally start relying on other people to love us rather than developing a sense of love of self. Now for me, this was really tricky. Like I remember in my 30s, I went through a big experience with my family where my whole family rejected me, and because I left their religious faith, and they just all rejected me. And I came to realise that actually I didn't care about myself as much as I thought, because I was so distressed by the fact my family didn't love me anymore or didn't care about me anymore. Now, once I worked my way through that, I came out the other end of that feeling very happy. And to this day, my family don't care about me, by the way. So they haven't really changed. But to this day, I'm happy now, right? So my love of self has grown. Not perfect yet, but it's getting there. But I've got enough love of self now to not really worry about what they feel about me at all. I don't even think about it anymore, about what their feelings or thoughts are about me. I'm aware of what they are, but it doesn't bother me anymore. Yeah.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it is lovely, because it means that I'm not waiting. You know, it might take, who knows, you know, it could take them 1,000 years to love me. You know, in my first century life, my father didn't love me very much in my first century life. The whole of my first century life, my father, Joseph, didn't love me much at all. He was very hard on me, critical. He wanted me to be a warrior, like a fighting messiah is what he wanted me to be. And he was quite angry with me a lot. He was also on the Sanhedrin, which was the 70 men who basically led the nation by the time of my death. And that was the Sanhedrin that condemned me to death. And even though my father wasn't involved in the vote, he wanted to be on the Sanhedrin that condemned me to death. So his feelings towards me weren't that good. After I passed, and he had some realisations about myself as a person and my care of others and so forth, within the next 12 to 15 years, he changed completely. So by the time he arrived in the spirit world, because he arrived in the spirit world well after I arrived, he arrived in the spirit world about 18 years after I arrived in the spirit world. And by the time he arrived, I could give him a hug and he could actually hug me and feel love for me. So, but all of my life up until then, he didn't care about me at all. Yeah? So he was more forceful with me, and you know, in my childhood he actually put me through some things that resulted in my torture as a young child even. So there was lots of feelings that he had about me that changed over time. But if I had taken some responsibility for his feelings and tried to take responsibility for his life, what I would have done is every time my dad wanted me to do something or be something, that's what I would have done. And it would have destroyed my relationship with God completely in that process. So my real father, I would have had no relationship with at all, because my other father, the one who created my bodies, you know, he wanted me to do something completely different. So this is the danger of not having some sense of self and love of self and getting into this addiction with your family to please them all the time. And that applies to husband and wife, partner as well. You know, the danger of pleasing them all the time without it being a desire just to give them a gift rather than just feeling the need or the guilt of pleasing them, is you enter this addiction that in the end detunes you so far away from yourself, but also away from your relationship with God as well. So that's why it's such a big thing to address. Yeah. Makes sense, Isabella? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
We just go across to Emma as well.
And if you're by yourself and you can't satisfy that addiction with physical people, you do it with spirits?
Well, you often do it with your children next.
Okay. Yep.
So if you have children, you set up the addictions with your children, which is obviously also a sin. And then on top of that, yes, for the most part, even if you're by yourself, you'll set up the same addiction with spirits. So you'll actually attract oppressive spirits who tell you what to do with the illusion that you're getting loved by them, and you'll attract them. And in the process of attracting them, they will get in your head a bit and tell you what to do with your life and so forth to please themselves, and you'll be very tempted to do those things. In fact, some people we've met even believe those spirits to be God, telling them what to do. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
And you've told me that I had spirits with me from early in my childhood.
yep.
So is it a similar dynamic with them?
Well, you think about your relationship with your father, right?
Yes.
You know your relationship with your father is one where your father was quite oppressive, telling you what to do, very disappointed with you when you didn't do what he wanted. Does that make sense? He was setting up things thinking he's helping you, but really he never asked you whether he was helping you. But he's thinking self-righteously, I'm helping my daughter, helping her out, so this is what he's doing. So if your father passes, can you see it's highly likely you're going to set up the same relationship with male spirits?
Yeah.
Because you'll actually interpret that as loving, and also you want the safety and security of somebody telling you what to do.
Yeah.
It's an illusion of safety, of course, but you want it.
Yeah.
And that's what, when we met you, right, for the first time physically, face to face, you were in that relationship with spirits. You were, and one of the very first conversations, you remember you invited us over for dinner, and the very first conversation was, what about these spirits that are with you? Like, what are you doing here with them, and what's going on, and how are you getting manipulated by these people? And as a result of you becoming more aware, which is not yet awakening, but it's the first part of awakening, aware. By becoming more aware that it was not a good thing, you started becoming also more aware of how they were influencing you.
Yeah.
And this is how you become aware of, they're trying to set up my relationships.
Yeah.
My very last relationship, they set up altogether.
Yeah.
You know, you become aware of these things through a process of discovery. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the difference between awareness and awakening, I can feel now, but I can't tell what I'm doing wrong exactly.
That's
There's
right, that's right.
something
That's the
wrong,
difference.
But I can't tell
what
it is, and so if I can't tell what it is, then I don't have the incentive to stop it, or
That's
I don't know how
right.
to stop it.
So you can say aware is just going, something's wrong. That's aware, right? I'm now worried that something's wrong, but I don't know what's wrong,
Yeah.
and I don't know why it's wrong, and I don't know how it's wrong, and I don't know what's really going on yet. And so you're going to discover all of those things down to awakening. Now, notice I put 10 there. I did that on purpose.
I did notice that.
Right, the reason why is there's a lot of steps, there's more than 10, but there's a lot of steps in between to get to this stage where I'm actually awake, where I go, I know what the sin is, I know what I'm doing, I know why I'm doing it, I know what emotion I need to address, I'm working through that emotion, I want to work through that emotion, I see the sin in it, and all of those kind of things. So you often start off at this sort of state where you something is made. Initially, it might even just be intellectually, but usually it requires a bit of feeling of something's wrong, and it bothers you. This is where you have sleepless nights, right? Where you go, something's wrong, and I don't know what about it, and then you worry about it, and then you praying about it, maybe, asking other people about it as well, like what's going on here? Can you see anything? Whatever. You're questioning the whole relationships of what's going on around you and so forth, because you're realising you're being bothered. Now, there's a combination of things going with being bothered, and one of them is the conscience, which is God basically saying something's wrong. If God can't tell you what's wrong, He can at least go, something's wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's sort of like you think of you own a car, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're driving along on a road with a car, and it's sort of like wandering over the road a bit. So it doesn't go where you point it.
Yeah.
Sort of like, like driving itself, it almost seems to be. Well, now, I'm not talking about these new self-drive ones now. I'm just saying there's something wrong with the car. So something's wrong.
Yeah.
So that's this point. Right? Now, it's easy for somebody to tell you something's wrong. It's easy even for you to recognise something's wrong.
Yes.
It's much, much more difficult to recognise what is wrong.
Yes.
Right? that requires a number of things on your part. If you think about it with a vehicle, you're driving along, it requires maybe a little experimentation.
Yeah.
It requires somebody giving you some extra knowledge. It requires you understanding what might make a car, wander over the road. Because there could be all sorts of things, couldn't there? There could be just loose wheel nuts on your wheel, and in the next 5 kilometres it might come off. Or it could be, wheel alignment, or what are called tie rods that control the angle of the vehicles on the road.
Yeah, and I have no idea what those things are, so I'd have to find out what are those things.
Exactly. And so most of us go, let's go to an expert. So we go and we take the vehicle to, a mechanic, and he tells us what's wrong, right? So you can also do that. You can go to somebody who you believe is an expert. But the trouble with that is that it's not very self-reliant.
Yes.
And not very self-responsible. It's also, you're making a dependency on the person.
Yeah.
So now you're dependent on them telling you things, which is, when it comes to your soul, is a dangerous thing.
I need the education so I understand.
Yeah,
so I don't do it again.
That's a part of this process. So once you become aware something's wrong, you've sort of got this thing going, wrong, but I don't know what. Now that's going to motivate the desire in you, potentially, to discover what, which is a very good thing to do for yourself. This is something every person needs to do for themselves.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So this process of awareness is just that initial something's wrong, right the way through to a complete awakening, which is I know exactly what is wrong, I know exactly what to do to fix it, I know exactly why it's wrong, I know exactly why it's a sin, I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
That requires a number of steps in between. And in about 2006 or 7 or something, I wrote a document, which is on our website, describing the process of awakening, which often begins on the intellectual basis, where you step through 7 or 8 steps intellectually, and then there's still no awakening, because for an awakening to happen, it has to be emotional. It has to be, because emotions motivate change, so it has to be emotional. So you also have to go through a number of steps emotionally in order to awaken. And I did describe those steps back then. And so I'd recommend it's good to sort of understand the process of awakening, because then you can go, I'm at aware, but I'm not any further than that.
Yeah.
And what do I need to do to get from aware to awake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with something like this that's been with me all my life, I guess it will take a little while to go through those steps.
Certainly. Often the things that have been with us for a while, and particularly since we're very young, it takes even a lot of time even just to get to aware. And usually after we get to aware, it's a lot easier, because our desire develops to awake after we become aware. But for many of us, it's like, and this is the case for most of you, you're not even aware of your sin yet, let alone awake to it. You follow? Because to be aware, become aware, you've got to know something's wrong in a situation. And frequently I see most of you acting in disharmony with love in a situation without seeing anything's wrong.
Is this where the sensitivity comes in?
Where the
sensitivity.
Emotional sensitivity.
Yes, to help with the awareness.
It helps. The conscience helps. We talked about the conscience a lot in Portugal, and also I think we started that discussion in Austria, didn't we? Mm-hmm. So conscience helps a lot. Yeah. There's also, obviously receiving love from God also helps, but of course you can't receive love from God until you awaken to some sin. So it's sort of like you've got to go through the process first.
Yeah.
So that helps a lot. But also having honest, truthful friends can help you a lot. People who care about you and love you, who you can sort of ask questions, just like going to a mechanic. But you just got to be careful of coming to rely on them. And so for myself, I've not had that in my life, like anybody I could sort of rely upon to tell me truths. And so I've had to come to a strong reliance on the conscience in order to hear God's truth being shared. And so when it comes to the operation of the conscience, I'm very focused on it myself, because that's like God's your friend, sharing facts through, truth through the operation of the conscience. And that can help you with your awareness to awakening process a lot,
Can we also add, Jay, compassion with self is quite important in that process.
Yep.
And curiosity, if you like.
Yep.
Being curious. Okay, I feel myself there. Oh, what
Experimenting,
was, sort of seeking, having a seeking kind of a heart about the whole process. Because it's a good process, but often we get uncomfortable because we start to judge what we're noticing. But actually, if you can stay soft in that process, it's so rewarding, because each new part of the awareness or the things that open up, now I understand myself so much better. Oh, this is why my life has gone like this. It's quite a good process.
Yeah. And when it comes to judgment, it feels like I'm getting judged a lot by the spirits.
Well, you are.
So
spirits around you generally, if they're in a codependent addiction with you, they don't want you to change. And so they're going to do things like try to undermine your change.
It's not a true judgment, because they're quite happy with you in that process. It's just more trying to shame you, if you like, back into your old behaviour.
Yeah. And I've been realising I've been agreeing with that. And now I'm trying to not agree with that.
But that's a part of the process of becoming awake. You go, I was doing this and I'm not, can't do that anymore either, and I'm doing that. And God wants you to go through the process yourself, because if you do it for yourself, you'll become very, very awake inside of yourself.
Yeah.
That's why He doesn't want, God wants the process to be voluntary on your part, because He knows that if it's voluntary and you do it for yourself, you'll not only end up with getting rid of the problem, but you'll end up with a great degree of confidence that you can solve any problem, which is obviously very important as well.
Yeah, I did feel like that. I didn't want to become dependent upon you, but like you are the source of truth. So I need the truth, but not to be like asking you everything.
Yeah, you say that, but actually when I did share with you about this stuff, you completely denied it at the beginning. So...
Oh, that first dinner, I said I was just completely under the influence. I couldn't, like...
I know. I know what was happening. But can you see how what I'm saying is you can even think that, Jesus has actually shared some truth with me, but the reality is most of us don't even believe that in our heart. I'm not fully
accepting it.
No, because at the end of the day, you have to go through an experience to know whether it was true or not.
Yeah.
And once you started going through the experience, you go, this is what he was saying, right? Now I get what he was saying. But that's a part of the awareness. One of the beautiful things about awakening to your own sin is that you become awake to others as well, as a part of the process. And that's really handy when it comes to dealing with your own sin, because then you start to be able to determine what is my sin and what is the other's sin.
Yeah.
So in other words, just earlier when we were talking to Isabella about her need to, do things for others, feel guilty about, others, you can start going, do I have to feel guilty about others? Well, that once you deal with that sin of feeling guilty, you'll recognise the sin of the other person demanding that you feel guilty. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's only by you going through your part that you start to recognise, there's the other half of that.
Yeah. I have found that really confusing. Like, what's my fault and what's their fault? Like, whose sin is this?
Yeah, and that's not going to be happening here. That only happens here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll get there.
So you've got to be sort of, as Mary pointed out, loving to self, patient with self, go through the process, develop a desire to go through the process, but you've got to let yourself go through the process.
Stay engaged in the process. A lot of people start to be aware, start the process and then go, I'm backing out. It's harder to back out once you've had initial awareness, but it's possible. Once you awaken, now you can never unsee or unfeel the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like up and down with it at the moment.
Yeah, well, in amongst here, you'll find there's certain, you say there's certain sins of your own as to the reason why you do a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so an example is you might be pandering to spirits, like in terms of doing what they suggest, but you have your own reasons for doing that, you know. And during the process of becoming aware, you go, here's the reason why I'm doing that. Like I like them interfering with my life because it makes me feel maybe more secure, more financially secure, makes me feel like I'm not going to get in trouble. You know, there's all sorts of things that can be reasoning that you start working out in the process of becoming awake. But once you are fully awake, you will not do it again. You will not want to do it again. You'll want to be. You'll feel sorry about all of the actions taken, and you'll correct them.
So in the process of awakening to a certain sin, you're sort of finding other sins along the way. And then are there sort of like just usually a few main sins, and then sort of all the others are sort of tributaries from it?
Mm-hmm.
Or-
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's the beauty of awareness, is that the aware to awakening process is you become so aware that you can feel the little tiny, even the little tiny sins in everything you do as to why, what motivation, why you do it, why you want to do it, how it feels. You become aware of all of that and where you've been doing it, every time you do it, everything.
And when you say you become aware of it and you feel it, I get like sometimes like a shooting pain here or like a feeling here. And is that sort of, is that how the conscience communicates, like through feeling different feelings in your
When you say
soul?
the conscience, God communicates to you via the conscience. So God can tell you at any time what is wrong. The real issue we have is listening. You know, it's a lack of emotional sensitivity most of us have, and most of us have had that because of childhood experiences. The lack of emotional sensitivity that occurs causes you to no longer be able to listen clearly. So God's always trying to share truth via the conscience. Whether you hear it is really a function of how sensitive you are. And so one of the goals God has with us is to make us more sensitive, to help us become more sensitive people.
And that sensitivity is like the whole of your physical body, spirit body, like
Well, your soul,
soul.
really.
Soul.
Because
Because God communicates to the soul. Yeah.
via the conscience, yeah.
Okay.
You're in a panic now, Em. Can
Yeah.
you reckon? Yeah.
Yep.
So a lot of your questions now are being driven by the panic. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to know it all right now.
Yeah, yeah. And this is another thing that, understand, fear is a feeling you're going to have to go through. At the moment, you're trying to avoid it. Now, when you try to avoid fear, you start asking lots of question after question after question after question, but you're actually not feeling your fear. And your fear is what's stopping you from understanding.
Okay.
So you're going to have to go through the fear, but you want a way to deal with these problems without going through fear.
Yeah. I want to just understand it all really, really well. I think
Well, that's what the purpose
but it's
of
not.
the purpose of that is to avoid fear. So yeah, and that's going to be, it's going to not work, is
Okay.
what I'm saying. You're going to have to feel fear first. Right? And this is about emotional truth. You're going to have to go through the feeling of fear. Then all of this mind thing you're doing will sort of all dissipate. And you'll trust the emotional process rather than going through everything in your mind all the time. Do you follow?
Yeah.
Yeah. But your dad taught you to use your mind all the time.
Yep.
So actually, a part of your process of awareness is going to be realising that actually I like using my mind all the time so that I can avoid the feeling of fear. Make
Yeah.
sense? And in the process of avoiding my fear, I get to not, fear stops me from understanding. So that causes me to more question, panic question, like all the time. And in this panic question phase of life, you're not going to be understanding anything. because the fear is an emotion preventing understanding. Yeah. So this is an awareness you have not had
Nope.
about your fear. If you could just choose to feel fear, then there'd be internal soul freedom to absorb information. The fear prevents the absorption of information. So I can say a whole heap of things and you won't even hear them. You know, just like our first conversation, right? I said a whole heap of things and it was fortunate you had a recorder on
Yeah.
because you didn't hear most of them until afterwards, right? When the fear started to die down a bit, then you could hear. Now, a very important thing is to allow yourself to feel the fear. So what's the fear about? It's going to be fear of disappointing dad, fear of disapproval from a male, fear of disapproval from God, thinking God is a male. There's a lot of things in there, right, that are stopping you from grasping, and it's about going through those things. Feeling the fear, not avoiding it through question. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.